Yvan, the recording is on. I will pass the presenter ball and the microphone over to you. Yvan Rooseleer is our colleague and great partner from Brussels, and Yvan will be delivering today's session, actually 2 sessions on JSON, automation, Python related to DevNet Associate curriculum. Yvan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Semyon. Hope you can hear me well enough. Using this device every day something can happen to sound, video, etc., and to our systems, but 99% of the time everything's okay. So that's me that you see there on the screen. On the left, preparing for this workshop at one of the last Cisco lives that were in person. That was Barcelona last year, and the other picture showing that I'm really interested and feeling passionate about technology. As most of us, we are all into Netacad. We know Cisco CLI, and now we are going to move from Cisco CLI to new developments, to software-defined, to automation, to Python, to JSON, and this session has the aim to introduce you to very important skills that are very useful for all of us instructors. My experience in preparing this session, this workshop, shows me very clearly that both students that I've been teaching in the first semester of this academic year in Brussels, and also I've been doing 2 instructor trainings as well. Well, it appears that many questions are coming when we are doing labs with Python tools, with API calls, with authentication, authorization, and with data exchange, like in this case, what you see on the right, JSON data. And this is the easiest example that I can think of coming from the Young model, and it's an example of the RESTconf API. Calling APIs is the easiest part. Authentication, authorization is more difficult than calling the API, and maybe most difficult is managing and processing the data. And that's what this session is all about. There are 2 parts. Now we are in part 1, where we'll be looking at examples of filtering JSON data coming from a large number of sources, network devices, servers, tools, you name it. And my advice for Netacad instructors would be, first of all, to try to do a lot of practice to improve your coding skills. We are not going to become programmers. It will still be some type of scripting. If you are already experienced in Bash scripting, then the step into Python scripting becomes easier. All of us who've been doing and writing programs have an easy step to start using Python for the jobs that we like to do. So constructing API calls isn't too difficult. The exchange data, the response data are more difficult. We are going to focus on that today. And this is part 1. So what's the trouble? What's the problem? JSON is a hierarchical tree structure, and it can be very deep and very long, and especially for us humans, it's overwhelming. Some examples. Example 1, coming from RESTconf to from my virtual router, the router I'm using to teach the class. It's a Cisco 1000 virtual system, CSR1K or 1000V. So here you see a URL. That's not too difficult. Authentication is more difficult, and then you get a response. Now this response is doable. It's not too long. I highlighted the keys. Typically, when you look at JSON, you will see a collection, a structure of key value pairs, all between double quotes. using colons. Before the colon we have a key, and after the colon we have the value. Like in this case, the value of interface is a list. And the first element in the list is the name, and in this case the gigabit 1 interface. So gigabit Ethernet 1 is the value and name is a key, and there are more than one interface, so it means that there is a bracket here. There is a bracket here, a square bracket indicating this can be a list. So one of the difficulties for us instructors and newcomers is, how do you recognize the meaning of the symbols? We see curly and square brackets. Curly brackets just means a key and a value will follow. And a value can be one item or a list. And a list you recognize with the square brackets. A second example from Cisco DNA Center, also a topic in the DevNet Associate course. Here we are doing a health request. How is the health of our clients? And you see the GET request with a URL, DNA Center, Intent API, requesting to know more about client health. And you see a response, you see a score, and the number of clients. I highlighted to make it easy to understand. Another example becoming more and more overwhelming from Webex. I would advise you to test programming Webex with Python API calls. It's a wonderful experience. Here I'm just using the people me API call, and I get my name back, and I see my display name, first name, last name, roles, when my account was created more than 4 years ago, my status is still active. Just to help you, I highlighted keys so that you see some of the content and some of it you might be needing. When you are teaching this course, the DevNet Associate course, you're also going to do labs using Ansible, a tooling environment for system configuration, network configuration, to gather facts about your network of devices. And gather facts is something we are using here. And what you get from the source is immense. Ansible facts is the name for it. You see the architecture, you see the IP address, and often you need to know an IP address, and it's not easy to find it in this overwhelming response data. Here is an example from Docker, and what I'm showing you is only examples. You don't have to understand them yet. Just see that it's overwhelming, a lot of information. You see in the response data, I highlighted host name, container, Docker version, architecture, operating system, etc. Next example is one I took directly from the DevNet website because I liked the explanation. It's one of the learning labs in which you learn how to deal with response data and how to write code, adapt code, just to be able to find host names as you see here, and then management IP address. And that's what we are trying to explain and experience in this workshop. Some tips for you. As soon as you start experimenting, and that's my aim, that after this workshop, you would start to experiment with the examples that we are giving you and with the demos that you will see. Just do it on your own or with a colleague or with students, and data types are really essential. And when you use the instruction print type, the system will tell you the type, because I can tell you from experience, you have something in your mind, but it's not always the same as the system believes. So our belief and the system is not all the time the same thing. In this case, you see it's addict, and addict is typically something starting with curly brackets and then a key and some values, in this case more than one, already explained. So that's one IP address. And multiple addresses you see here with a list again. And in this case, if you want to know the type, it will tell you it's a list. Here it's a dict because it starts with curly braces. Over here it's a list. In this case, 2 IP addresses starting with square brackets. So we need to recognize the type. You can only do certain operations if you are sure that it's the correct type. And then you can start filtering, especially when it's a dict, because dicts have keys and values. And if you want to know and find out the keys of the response data, you use a function with the name of keys. That's something we will be practicing in the workshop. Also, you need to know how to transform. JSON dumps, JSON loads. Not going to explain, there are examples about it. Of course, sometimes you need libraries in your Python script. To do a GET request, you need to import requests. To deal with JSON, you have to import JSON. So before the demo, just remember, data types are important. Typically, JSON will be a combination of dicts and lists. In any way, they can be combined in many possible ways. And here is a dictionary, a key, and the value. And the IP address, second example, is also a dictionary. Here you see a basic lists with only values. You can have a list of values, leaves, and you can have a list of dictionary containers, so-called, and in that case it will be a list of key value pairs. All of this looks like theory, but I can tell you as soon as you start practicing, maybe together with one of your colleagues or your students, it should work. So that was the intro. It should be overwhelming because all of the data that we get as response data are really overwhelming for human beings. So why don't we try to get grips on it? Now, before demoing, I'd like you to show a document. This is a complete document explaining everything you should know for this workshop. And my presentation and my demo is based on this document. This document is based on the emerging technology courses and on the DevNet Associate course. There is nothing really new in it, but everything you should know with relation to JSON and with data types is in this document. It's about 30 pages with an index so that you can move around easily. And now let's go into the practical part. So here you see some Python code. It looks like what we are showing, and in the presentation, it's the same information that we now are going to run in Python. So I'm using Jupyter or Jupyter Notebook just because, in my opinion, it's an easy tool to experiment, to test if something works well. Also, I think a good tool for demonstrations. I learned this tool from the IoT courses in Netacad because Jupyter or Jupyter is a tool used in the IoT fundamentals course and also in the big data course. I transformed the document into this HTML. Why did I do that? Because you can easily copy examples like this one. This is a dictionary with the subnet masks and the prefix. When you look carefully, you should recognize this if you are a CCNA instructor. Now, when you move to one of the tools, any tool is fine. In this example, I'll be doing it with idle, a well-known interpreter for Python, and I will run the code that I just copied. I've already done some testing. As you see, you have to save and run, and you will see that the result should be here. What does this mean? If I use as input the prefix 224, it looks like the answer is 27. Let's now change the input to 248. Now it's 29. All of us teaching CCNA should understand this very well, and I think this is a good example of a dict. A dict is a collection of key value pairs, and in this case the key is the subnet mask and the value is the prefix. I've always been writing this on the blackboard, the whiteboard for students, because some of our students have problems with this. So there is this HTML file in the folder where I've put all the documents for this workshop together, and in the chat of this session I've given you the link to all the files, and the link is also in my presentation, so you should be able to use it. Now some examples. Let's do 10 minutes of examples or 15 minutes because we have some time left, of course, and the first thing I like to do with you is now giving you some examples. I'm importing JSON because I'm going to convert some of the data in this example. I see a single IP address here. There is the IP key with a value, and the second is the net mask. We consider this a container of two keys with respective values. The second is the multiple version, which we often have in network devices, more than one IP address, and then you need the square. So remember from now on that the square indicates a list, and the curly brackets just explain now we are going to have one or more key value pairs. We also like using the IETF format. We all know IETF standards for many of the IP protocols and routing protocols that we are teaching about and using in configurations. So over here is an example of the interface part of IETF, and also you need to learn how to request values from it. Someone's calling me all the time today. Why? So when you look at this IETF example, you see that the key address, which is the real key used in IETF for modeling and for software-defined networking, the address, there is more than one IP address with a net mask, as you see. So now let's dive into the data. What is it that you have to train? What do you have to do hands-on? Now ask for the type. So here is the type of the single address, then the type of the multiple address variable, also the type of the IETF IP4 variable I'd like to see. And then the next element I want to find in the data is what's the first and what's the second address. I will explain in a minute what it means. This is, let's say, short code that's quite powerful, what I'm highlighting here. And today I added some more examples, but let's first look at the results. So the type of single address is a dictionary, because it's between square brackets. The type of multiple is a list. And I cannot use the selector for a specific key if it's not a dict. That's why I have to check the type. If it's a dict, I'm able to see the see the value of this key. Since in IETF, the example you see here, there is a list, you have to use an index, and the first element in a list is 0. We always start with 0 and then 1 and then on more, if you like. So the first address is going to be printed, and we want to see the IP address, and it's exactly the address 101 that you see here and also there. In reality, you might not see the response data. You just write code in a script and then immediately you see the result you're interested in. I'm showing some of the response data here, but in reality, you wouldn't see it. So you use the script to find the code that you need. And address is the key here. And the key I have to use between square brackets. And in this situation, square brackets mean a selector of a specific key. So I want to find out the value of the key address, the IP address, in this case called IP. And since it's a list, I have to use an index. Suppose we forget using the index, what will happen? Let's use some comments. So below the one, instead of just one item, it gives you the full structure. And that's not useful in this situation. So let's do this again and run the code one more time without the extra stuff. And what is it that you see now? You see now the first and the second address. If I replace the 0 by 1 and the 1 by 2, you see there are not as many elements because I'm out of range already. And in order to avoid this, you could write a loop, we'll see that in a minute, or you request to see the last item, and the last item we call -1. If you use -1, you will find the last. You could also request to see the number of items so as not to make a mistake concerning the index. So it's easy to make mistakes. And after enough practice, you will never make this mistake again. I remember making mistake when I had to configure ACLs. Difficult enough, if you remember. Network address translation, also quite difficult. And this is not more difficult. It's just a matter of getting used to. So here was an example of IP addresses. The next example is subnet masks. Let's give you as an example. I'd like to know the subnet mask of the prefix 25. Think of the answer yourself, and over here is the answer. It's 128. If you've been teaching, you should know. So I invite you to test and practice with these examples. Let me move on a little bit. Here you see a more difficult example because RESTconf is a very good tool to manage your network using Python scripts, but it requires hands-on labs to understand. Here you have to understand the data structure and you have to analyze it a little bit. Then you ask for what's the type, and again we see that the type is a dict. And if you don't know the keys, you just request to see the keys as I'm highlighting there, and the result is shown here below. So the keys for an interface are the name, the description, the type, if it's enabled, IP4 and IP6 addresses, and IP4 and IP6 addresses, if you look carefully, are a list. There can be one or more, as you see here, IP address. That's why I'm showing the example here from the IETF interfaces. What am I doing? I want to find the first address of the first interface. So this is the first interface, and you move further into the structure from IETF, and then you say 0 again, meaning IP1. The result for IP1 should be the first IP address, and that's what we see here.
Yvan, just a second. I just wanted to highlight that we have started the poll. while we will be concluding your presentation within the next maybe 5 or 7 minutes. The poll will be running so participants can take it. Please go on. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm demonstrating a lot of examples here that I'm hoping you will practice on your own. And if you have trouble, look into documents that I showed you, or just send us a message when there is a problem. But typically, the examples I'm showing you are in the emerging technology workshops, are in the DevNet Associate course, but everything that you should know as an instructor is together here. And if you can manage this, you are well prepared for all the hands-on labs for teaching the courses. So over here, I'm selecting Ansible information, like what's the IP address? And after a while, you see it's always the same that you have to do. There is not a lot of different approaches. When you want to select, you need to know the first level key, then the second level key, and if there is a list, you have to say which element of the list you want to see. 0 meaning I want to know the first IP address. So if ever you want to know the IP address of an Ansible system, this is one of the ways to find out, and it will certainly work. Here you see the output of all the addresses. My address that I requested is in the list, but you will see how long this is. It's immense. The next example is going to be Docker, and that's a little bit less. So this is still going on for Ansible. Here is a third example from Ansible. And then we see the example from Docker. That's more doable, but I've often seen that doing labs with Docker, it's necessary to understand and to inspect the information in a Docker environment and maybe find out the IP address or other things for Docker. So over here, my last example shows you the IP address of the Docker system, of the Docker container. We talk about containers in the DevNet Associate course. So I want to know the result for the first container, and the result I want to see is the IP address of it. So that was an example, a short one, an indication of Docker. Finally, I have here a hierarchical structure for Webex, groups and members. And as you see, a group has a name and a member has a person name. And this can be used to create Docker spaces, so-called rooms, groups and members, so that they can collaborate in a Docker environment. And here you see that I want to know the first group and what's the name of the first group. And then in the first group, I want to see the first member, because I have not shown an example with a loop yet. If you don't know how to write loops, you have to use an index like the 0 and the 1s here, because in here I'm looking for the second group, and that's 1. So when you run this code, you will see that the first person in group A should be Nico, which is correct in my case, and the first person in group B is Yvan. So that's always the same way of requesting to see information in an overwhelming amount of data. You have to know the keys, you have to know the structure, you have to find out what key comes first, and you put all the keys next to each other to go deeper and one level deeper. So groups is level 1, then there is a list, then we get into level 2 and level 3. So in fact, we have 3 levels here. That's a typical example. And here, the same example with a loop. You see that loops make your life easy especially if it's more than 3 items in a list. Using the index would be too much work for us in our scripts, so we have to learn to understand the for next structure. For group G in the structure called groups, print the name of the group, and then for all the members in the group, print the name as well as the IP address with some symbol in between. Just an example here, like the group name is the second level and the first level is group. Let's check if this is correct. Group and group name. So when you see the structure before your eyes, it's not too difficult. I advise you to use this structure to learn how to use indexes, how to create a loop. But I can tell you the loop is always like this. You only have to choose the correct key and you put the next level, the key of the next level in the second place and so on. It looks difficult, but after a few exercises, it's really doable. And here is an example, another example with IP addresses. If you want to know the first, the second, or all of the IP addresses, if you want to know all of the IP addresses, definitely, again, you write a loop. And then the system will return the values you need. Typically, in your environment, you might not be using print, but when learning, this is something that we do all the time. All the time, we use print statements. It's like the debugging statements in Cisco CLI. What's the value of this? What's the data type of the other variable? What are the operations I can do? And it's all, this is also a good example, the one I'm stopping with now. The first example shows you a combination of one single address, no list. The second one is the same thing in the format of a list. And then the next example, IETF, is a more complex structure, but it's exactly how it exists in reality. So the real world, the standards require that we are able to understand tree structured information and that we are able to select the right key, the right index to find exactly the value that we need. So that will conclude my introduction into this workshop. I'd like to repeat that everything is explained in a Word document online that you can find with the URL I provided you with. The URL is also at the end of this presentation. You can find this slide deck, latest version, because I'm improving the contents or the visual representation of everything, etc. So the slide deck, there is a reference for it, for all the data files. That's the one I gave you in the chat window, and the background document, all of the explanations that I wasn't able to explain during 30 minutes are really explained here. I'm looking forward to your feedback, to your questions, and I hope that you feel motivated to try to do this experiment. Remember, and believe me, it's always the same with different keys. Yeah, it's not too difficult. After a while, you get used to it and you find it totally normal, even not more difficult than the CLI structures that we are often already used to. All right, that's it for part 1. In part 2, we will show you how to generate JSON and then automatically create structures in networks or in applications like Webex. And we will start with an example where we create spaces and members automatically in Webex Teams, and that's a very fun activity. You will certainly like it, and that's at 5 o'clock. Time is running fast. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm ready with the introduction, and looking forward to hear your feedback. Thank you.